sensational.
Stand by.
What on earth is going through the mind of Eliud Kipchoge? We have liftoff.
Oh, it's right and he got it! It's 6! That's a great break. There's no stopping him from there. Oh, he gets in the way! Shoots! Oh,
Step into the light!
This guy is an excitement machine. He is going to charge at you.
Beautiful play.
This shot is one of the biggest in tennis.
Massive run for the defending World Cup champion! Absolutely spotless jumping.
Oh, he dropped it! The run of his life. Gold!
Kevin Harvick wins the Brickyard 400! Fitting enough to win any FA Cup final.
An electric heel of a striker.
The bell's gone. They're carrying on. Come on, referee.
Thank you, Jersey, for coming out.
It's the final try in the final. He's got it! England have won the World Cup!
That is brilliant.
Come on, he says. Come on, this is it. Eliud Kipchoge storms into the history books in Vienna. The first man to run a marathon in under 2 hours. No human is limited.
Welcome to this Royal Television Society Thames Valley webinar, Keeping Ahead of the Game. And that's surely what our guest has been doing for the past 4 decades. I'm Tim Marshall, Chair of the RTS Thames Valley, where we have at our core the desire to promote the conversation between the technology and creative communities, something today's guest is a past master at. Jeff Foulser started his work life as a T-boy at LWT in the 70s. Soon becoming the youngest program editor on the network, producing ITV's iconic Big Match football show. His ITV sport remit then broadened to include World Cup football and the Olympics. In 1996, he became MD at Sunset and Vine, turning this little-known company into an award-winning production company, both in the UK and internationally. Following a successful spell as chief executive at the Television Corporation, in 2005, he became chairman and CEO of Sunset Vine Productions, part of the Tinopolis Group, and now one of the major sports producers in the world. Productions include 3 Commonwealth Games as host broadcaster, World Athletic Championships, and all ICC cricket worldwide since 2016. Currently in the UK, Sunset and Vine are the primary production partner for BT Sport, delivering Premier League, Europa League and Scottish football, plus Premiership and European rugby. So there's a little bit to be getting on with there. Welcome, Jeff.
That was slightly embarrassing because I've always believed in the team ethos of sports production, and it's certainly never been about me. It's more about the quality of the people you have around you, I think. And I think that's that's the main reason why, Sunset and Vine have been, reasonably successful the last few years. It's the quality of the people in the business. But yeah, I was a T-boy. I didn't go to university. I did my A-levels, but didn't fancy more studying. It wasn't my bag. I was heavily into sport, and at one point I was thinking of becoming a pro cricketer, would you believe? But I went on a tour with the Middlesex under-18s, and we were away for about 3 weeks, played virtually every day. And I got home, chucked my bag down, and said to my mum, I can't do this for a living. I love the game. I ended up playing league cricket for 20 odd years, but she said, well, you better get a proper job then. So I completely disregarded her in that sense, and managed to get into TV. Now, I applied at the time to the BBC and to London Weekend Television because I lived in London. And I got a reply back from the BBC, which said, come back when you've got a degree, young man. So, and then I got a reply from LWT, and they said, we've got a vacancy as a junior clerk in the sports department. So I had one interview and then got through to another interview with Jimmy Hill, who was the head of sport then. And Jimmy and I I mean, I knew who he was, so, I was slightly in awe. But, in those days, my parents were very much working class. My dad drove a cab and all that. They didn't have a clue, didn't have any connections or anything. And I didn't really have a clue how to prepare for an interview. But we just went in, and Jimmy made me feel at ease. And we talked sport for about 45 minutes. And I presume he saw something in this kid, 18-year-old. And as I walked out, his secretary put her arm around me and said, "I think you're going to be all right." Nobody else had lasted more than 10 minutes. So that was the start of the journey, really. And yeah, it was making the tea. And my record, for anyone that's out there that can be bothered to listen, is 17 cups of tea, polystyrene cups of tea on a tray. And I might have spilt a bit, but managed to get them back up the floor to the office. So yeah, that's how it started.
Well, we'll come back to that a bit later, because obviously we've probably got some people listening who are interested in getting into TV, and I know it's a bit different getting into it these days than when you and I started. But what I want to do is come right to the present at the moment, because these days are extraordinary. And I think most of us have had pandemics on the risk register, and we pushed it to one side thinking, well, we have to have it there, but it's never happened. This year, it's happened with a vengeance, and obviously affected many areas, but not least live sport has been one area that's really been challenged. What are the biggest challenges you've had to face?
Initially, keeping the business running, if I'm honest. We've got a very, very solid, good business with, lots of different clients. And by sort of mid-March, we were firing on all cylinders, and, loads of OBs happening all over the place, all over the world, really, on a weekly basis. And we went from that to nothing. And we still had 130 odd staff who we needed to keep paying. So I have to say, the last 8 months or so has probably been the most challenging of my career. And not just for me, but for everybody else in the business. We had to furlough over 100 people, and everybody else took pay cuts, which I know for them was very painful. But we had to do it to conserve cash to get us through this, really difficult time. And, we are really thankful for BT Sport, who, are our biggest client, who basically said, "We want you to be here after this is over, and we're going to keep paying you." So they did, and that helped. And obviously the furlough money helped, and we've come through it now, and we're fine.
What were the conversations going on between you and the sports federations and the broadcaster in those periods, saying, how are we going to get this back on the road? How are we going to start? Because there aren't going to be crowds in the stadium.
You're all dependent on what the government say, to be honest. I mean, the first thing we did within 2 weeks of lockdown, and this was BT's initiative, but their guys and our guys made it happen, was a show called Early Kickoff in Isolation. I mean, probably if you look back at that now, it would look unbelievably dated, but it was actually quite groundbreaking. I mean, the first show we had, and I might have to look at some notes here, but we had Jake Humphrey, the presenter, in his cottage in Norfolk. We had Joe Cole, a footballer in Essex, Karen Carney in Surrey, Jermaine Genus in Herefordshire. And then all our production team were working from home via linked screens and talkback units provided by Timeline. And somehow our technical guys managed to get a 90-minute show on the air, which was an extraordinary technological feat, really. But we've come a long way since then. I mean, for instance, this weekend we're at one of the games we're doing this weekend is Brighton-Liverpool from the Amex Stadium, and we'll have a presentation and commentary team on site there. The programme will be produced out of a gallery in Stratford, which is BT's studios, and then they'll be supported by a team throughout the Stratford building. But the match direction comes from a remote operations centre in High Wycombe, which was built by Telegenic. So the director and the vision mixer and the EVS ops all sit there. So you've got, three prongs to getting a football match on the air. And it's a very, very different way of working. But people have become, people seem to have become quite used to it now.
Now, when Jamie from BT was on one of our sessions earlier in the year, he said that the move to remote working was something that was in the pipeline. There was a project plan, but it was probably a 3-4 year project. We've now achieved it, he said, in 3 to 4 months. What of that transition is going to stick, and what things are we going to go back to?
As far as BT are concerned, it will pretty much all stick. Yeah, I mean, Jamie was right, and I think it's probably accelerated the move to remote production by a couple of years, maybe 3 years. I don't see BT going back on that, although it does depend on the clients. We're covering the Wales England rugby match on Saturday in Llanelli. Did well to say that, didn't I? And Amazon, who are our client there, they want everybody on site, socially distanced, of course. And we've got about 125 people, including the talent, on site.
And what is their reason for that?
I just think they come from it in a more traditional way. They think people operate better when they're together. I think there's things to say for doing it both ways. I would hope that going forward, if we stay with remote production, which we're going to with BT, that people like the directors and the producers get a chance to maybe occasionally do a game on site, so the director can actually have a chat with the cameramen, camera women in the compound, can have a chat with the talent beforehand in the Winnebago, and you get that sort of connection with people, which I think people are beginning to lose that a bit, I think. And I think we find that in an office environment as well. We've got people in the office today, despite the government saying, try and work from home. Most of them can. Most of them had enough of working from home. They want to have that connection and that chat by the coffee machine or whatever it is, which is the basis of running any business, I think.
We hope that crowds will be returning, hopefully in the new year sometime. But during this year, there's been one interesting debate going on, and it goes on with commentators and professionals and the punters themselves, is as to whether you choose to watch a football match with enhanced sound, or whether you like to listen to the players effing and blinding in clear Technicolor. What's your position on that?
My position has always been that you shouldn't mess with what you've got in front of you too much. I think enhanced sound is fine. I mean, it's done from an EA Sports, the FIFA games. So there's a guy, one of the sound ops sits in a truck and mixes in that sound. I think that's fine. It's artificial and it's not as good as the real thing. But I wouldn't mess around with the live coverage too much. The viewers are not stupid. They know there's no crowd there. I think the grounds, most of the stadiums have done well in terms of putting big banners and flags and that sort of thing, which sort of fills in the backdrop. And
the sponsors are getting a real double dip for their money, aren't they? Have you actually adjusted the size of your shots in the wide angles, for example?
I don't think so. There's no point in trying to, who are we trying to fool? Just cover it the way you normally cover it, and it'll be fine. And I think, by and large, people have got, relatively used to watching sport played in front of no fans. But it lacks not everything, because you're still seeing the players running around, but it lacks a huge amount of what makes sport so engaging.
Let's go back to when you got into TV. And I mean, you got into sports departments in those days were quite entrenched departments. There were the great gods, the Ginger Cowgills in the BBC and John Bromley at ITV. These were people in the sports broadcast world you sort of almost bowed down to. And there was quite a long pecking order to get to the top, and yet you seem to shoot up. Why do you think that was? Apart from probably good, but
it's difficult to say, really. I mean, there were only two broadcasters really in those days, and the BBC, who were, by far the most watched channel, and whenever anything's on simultaneously, they still are. But they had some, obviously some excellent people at the BBC. But we had some, really talented people at ITV, and I was fortunate that in my early days, I was taken under the wing by people like John Bromley. Jimmy Hill was, he was the head of sports, so he didn't get involved in the day-to-day. But John Bromley was an incredibly good and strong journalist. So I think I got my journalistic training, if you like, from people like him. You know, giving you a right bollocking if you got something wrong, but always done in a positive way, to be honest. And a guy called Bob Garden, who, you know, some people listening might remember, who was a fantastically talented OB director, and I think was responsible for the way football is covered now. He was the first person to put a camera down on the pitch side, and actually got a pit built at Wembley Stadium so you could drop the camera in, which gave you really good low angle shots of the players. And then Brian Moore, who was, you know, a superlative commentator. And I became, you know, I mean, he was obviously much older, but he taught me the basics of, you know, writing scripts and, you know, how to present programs. And yeah, I suppose I did go up the ladder reasonably quickly, but I went from, you know, logging in VT to, you know, I mean, you used to look back and there were no replays when I first started, right? Yeah. So when you would cover a game, most games were recorded anyway. And we had a piece of kit called the HS 100, which was a hard disk, and you could only record 32 seconds of action before it wiped, and then you lost it. You never got it back. So although I wasn't a member of the AC, what was that union?
ACTT.
ACTT.
Alan Sepper.
Yeah, Alan Sepper, yeah. I wasn't a member of that union, but for some reason they allowed me to operate this bit of kit, and I became, you know, reasonably skilled at doing it. So I could probably store 2 or 3 goals on this 32-second thing, and then we'd put them back into the edit, you know, just using the paddle. And it's amazing, really. There was one HS 100 in the whole ITV network at the time. And Granada and Yorkshire, when they were doing a midweek game, they would ring up ITV and so a London Weekend and say, we need the HS 100 on this. Can you get Jeff to operate it? And I used to get paid 12 quid for doing that, which in the days when I was earning probably 30 quid a week was a lot of money. So I used, you know, I mean, and it was great fun, you know. But yeah, the guys now would not believe how ponderous everything was in those days, operating on 2-inch tape. You know, if you wanted to roll a 2-inch tape in those days, it took about 11, 12 seconds to synchronize before you could put it to air. So everything was done on 15-second rolls. And there was one fantastic story when it was the World Cup in '74, I think, and it was my first big chance at running VT, and I was about 21 or something. And we were just about to go on air with a really, really big game. Bob Garden was in the studio, and he was the best OB director, but bless him, he's dead now, but he knows I didn't think much of him as a press director. Anyway, we had about 8 different videotape machines ready to go at the top of the show with cross rolls and everything. And with 15 seconds to go, he said, roll VT. Now that's the PA's job anyway. So all 8 VTs rolled at the same time. And I went, Bob, what are you doing? So I got on to talk about it. He said, you've got to take VT 1 or 2, or whatever it was. Now I'm running around in the VT area going, you go back to your queue, you go back. Oh, it was a bloody nightmare. And that was what it was like. You know, you just
Are there any,
got through.
I mean, I don't want too many war stories, but I've got to ask you one. I mean, are there any cock-ups that you will admit to now in those days? I mean, the famous one at the BBC, one of my colleagues, the late Don Sayer, missed a goal on the edit of Match of the Day. So it was Manchester United 2, Spurs 1, and you only saw 2 goals. Can you own up to anything like that these days?
Yeah,
or?
Yeah, I did an edit of a game, QPR against somebody. I can't remember who it was. But look, this was in the days when the big match got 6 or 7 million viewers. And it was like religious for people that love football. They watched it every single week. So the edit was a work of art, or we used to think it was a work of art. So, you know, you'd be putting close-ups in to cover a throw-in, and the edit of the match would take probably 3 or 4 hours to do, to cut it down to you know, 23, 24 minutes. And there was one occasion where I was watching on the Sunday, watching the program go out, having, you know, worked all night, go into the studio, we shoot the links and put the show together on the Sunday morning. I get home, watch the show go out, and the same piece of tape went in twice. And I thought, that's the end of my career. And what had happened was, I mean, it was my fault because I was in charge, but the editor editing it had gone back. We'd cut some out because it was running too long, and he'd gone back to the wrong cue, and we didn't check it. And, you know, I never did that again.
Well, that's very honest of you, and I'm sure you're not going to get into trouble now. What about some of the owners in those days? The football club owners, the chairman. There were characters like Jarvis Astaire around in boxing, and Bernie Ecclestone, of course, in motor racing. How did you get on? Because obviously, as you became more senior, you had to look outside the organisation and deal with the people who ran the sports. Yeah, well, I got, you know, I mean, my main role at ITV was really in football, so I got to know the clubs really well. You know, I'm a Tottenham man from my sins, so I knew all the board there, the Richardsons, and then the Irving Scholars and people. And you know, if I wanted a ticket, yeah, director's box, come. And, you know, that was all lovely. It's funny, really. You just sort of get into it. I mean, I was obviously very young, but you develop these relationships. In fact, I have got a Bernie Ecclestone story because when I was at Sunset and Vine, I did actually join Sunset and Vine before '96, but I joined in the early '90s. But I took over in '96, and when I was fed up with the way Sunset and Vine was being run at the time, and so I put some feelers about, and ITV. I was going to go back to ITV, essentially as head of sport, and we had a plan with Ian Ritchie and I. Ian, who became chief executive of the All England Club and the RFU. He and I were going to go in and take over ITV Sport. That was the plan. He eventually got a job with Channel 5. But at that time, when I was leaving and going back to ITV, I said to Ian, I think there's a chance to get Formula One from the BBC. And anyone from listening to the BBC will probably know this story. I remember it well. Yeah,
and it wasn't Ian that I dealt with, but it was the director of programs from LWT, a lady called Eileen Gallagher, I think, and a lawyer, a guy called Andrew Chown. So I went and saw them, and they said, yeah, we're really interested in this. What do we need to do? I said, we've got to go and see Bernie. Well, what's he going to want to know? I said, well, at that stage, there were 15 different ITV regional companies. I said, he's going to want to know that all the ITV regions will take every race live, and how much money. And they said, that's all. I said, that's all he'd be interested in. So we went down to Prince's Gate. We walked into his palatial office. And as we walked in, he said, okay, which one signs the check? And we looked at Eileen and we said, she does. And he said, right, well, you two can fuck off. Excuse my language. Anyway, he then laughed and we sat down. We gave him, and I said to them, don't write more than a couple of sheets because he won't read it. And he sort of glanced at the first sheet, glanced at the second sheet, and looked up and he said, 7 out of 10 for the money. And we went, okay. He said, right, that's it. Come back within 24 hours. So we're walking out of his office, and they said, what was all that about? I said, I think we're all right. You just need to up the money a bit. Anyway, they went back within 24 hours. And then he made the infamous phone call to Jonathan Martin, who was the head of sport at the BBC.
Yes, remember it very well.
Who had done Formula One, you know, really well for years and years and years. He said, Jonathan, I've just sold it to ITV. That must have been tough to take for Jonathan. But that was Bernie. You know,
that's a very basic business relationship. Some of them are very complex. So you've got on your track record pitching in to be host broadcaster at big games, you know, the Commonwealth Games and what have you. And you go in and pitch against other people. And these games, for those people that haven't been to them, one of the components of it is an international broadcast centre, which is a highly complex technical organisation that goes with being a host broadcaster. And I think Paul Mason may be on the call, who is one of the doyens who knows how to put these things together. But when you go in and pitch for the business, Jeff, how do you go in there? Because it's complex and it's a big pitch, and your company's business life might be riding on it.
Yeah, well, it took us a number of years to really have the confidence to go for these sort of really big events. And in fact, we bid our first major foray was for the Asian Games in, which I think was in Qatar in 2006. And we got really close to winning that. Yeah, well, we were told we were a really, really close second, which is, when you've spent quite a lot of money in your bid, it's not really what you want to hear. But it sort of convinced me that we had the wherewithal to be able to pitch for these things, but we weren't quite there yet. And then when Glasgow Commonwealth Games came up, we got talking. Well, I think it was Mark Dennis who, as our technical guru, said that a company called Global in Australia, now part of the NEP group, were looking for a partner in the UK. So we got together and we thought it was a good fit. Global provided all the technical expertise, and we provided the creative side, the production side. And we managed to put a pitch together which was successful. And NEP, or Global as they were then, had just done Delhi. So they put they put the IBC in. So all the technical infrastructure was done by them. So we had the security of knowing that we were going in with a company with a track record in that department. And then, our sort of creative approach would sort of complement that. And, that was a very nice moment. And, I think we did a pretty good job between us on that. I think that, the rights holding broadcasters were all very happy. And it sort of convinced me that we could do more of this. And, fortunately we have gone on to do more. But the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham was an interesting one because, we had some options about who we were going to go in with, and various things didn't happen. I don't want to go into that now. But I actually felt that we had a team, once we talked about the team that we could put together with Dave Gordon heading it up, David Tippett, Mark Dennis, Ruth Heyman, who's the finance lady, and our brilliant production management team. I knew that we could come up with a really convincing plan, not just to roll out what we'd done before, but to really look at it with fresh eyes, really, and that's what we did. My belief, and that I think that's been vindicated, really. I don't want to sound big-headed about it, but the problem with these big events is they get done a certain way, and then they get the same bunch of people go around from one to the next, and it's all, well, this is how we did it last time. We'll just do that and add a bit. And we went, well, why don't we just start with a blank sheet of paper and say, how do we really want to do it in the modern world? And we did it, and I think we came up with a price which was pretty compelling. And I think we came up with a sort of breath of fresh air approach to a pitch. And we managed to win it. And I always say to the guys here, the hardest part of our business is winning the pitch. We will deliver it because we've got a brilliant team. I'm not saying it's easy, because it's not. But if you've got really good people, and I'm a hostage to fortune here, but I think our coverage in Birmingham will be absolutely top class. I'm not saying it's better than anybody else's, but it'll be something that we can, hold up to the world and say, this is right up with industry standards.
Okay, well, you said you look at it with fresh eyes. I know certainly with when I've been involved with OBS, that when they pitch for when they go for new Olympics every time, for the rights holding broadcasters, they're always saying, we want something fresh, we want something different. And I know they're always looking at new angles or new technologies that are going to make the story much more interesting. Yeah. So have you got are you able to tell us of some of the tricks you've got up your sleeve for Birmingham?
Well, no, because probably I don't know them. That's being done by the team. No, look, we are. Yeah, I don't want to go into too much detail of that, but I mean, there's all sorts of things that come on stream all the time. I mean, this week, for instance, at the rugby, the Amazon Rugby, which is a nice big budget. I mean, I can come back to the Commonwealth Games, but we've got Batcam, which is a drone. We've got Eagle Cam, which I didn't even know it was called Eagle Cam until recently, and that's a two-point system rather than Spider Cam, which is the 4-point system. And the reason it's only a 2-point system in Llanelli is because it would be too expensive to put the towers up to make to put the 4-point system in. So yeah, we'll be doing lots of things like that.
Well, let's just stick with the rugby a moment, because there are some quite good innovations being put in. I mean, I personally saw the overhead camera being used well for the scrummaging the other week, because it's so contentious now of who's screwing who and who's turning it, that actually that does tell the story of it. So that's quite interesting. But Jonathan Martin unfortunately can't be on the call. I think he's got a Thanksgiving dinner, but he did mention to me when he knew we were doing this, he said he feels sometimes that everything is over-engineered and gets in the way of the story. We've got too many cameras. One of his thing I used to shout at us down the line about it was crossing the line. And he says, it seems now everyone's crossing the line all the time. Have they got too big a budgets? Have they got too many cameras? Do you sense that? Or?
Well, I think you could say, yeah. I mean, I think there are times when there are too many cameras. And I think if you added up how many seconds some cameras are on the air in a game, it'd be quite shocking, really. But I think it's really about how the directors use them. I think some directors use Spider. I think Spider Cam is an interesting camera. I think it has to be used in a very.
Can you just explain it in case people don't know what Spider Cam is?
Well, it's a gyroscopic camera mount on a 4-point system of cables, which a guy sits. I don't know where they sit now. They used to sit on the edge of the pitch. They might be in the OB truck, but they control it remotely, so it can move up and down and from side to side at really quite fast speeds. The temptation is to overuse it and to use it in areas when it's not adding much value, and you can end up feeling quite sick watching it. But I think that's the key with all technology, is just because it's there and available, it doesn't mean you've got to shoot the hell out of it or use the hell out of it. You've got to, we've got loads more technology than when I started in the business, but basically, covering sport has not really changed in any way. It's still about telling a story. It's still about telling the right narrative, the right editorial approach, and it's still about great cameramen and women and great directors. That hasn't changed. It's only the technology that's changed, but the essential way you cover sport hasn't really changed and won't, because it's still about the human stories.
Absolutely. Just while we're here, and just make a point that if the chat is open, if anyone wants to chuck in a comment or a question, please feel free to do so. I'll keep an eye on it.
Tell me I'm talking rubbish.
No, I'm sure no one would say that. They might tell you cross the line too much, but I don't think they say rubbish.
No, I've got a story about Jonathan, actually, because we covered we used to do the horse racing for the BBC, and for the first few years they wouldn't let us near the Grand National because it was like this sort of sacrosanct event which only the BBC had done for.
Keith Mackenzie, wasn't it, who did that?
Yeah, I think it was.
Yeah.
Anyway, our guys had done it really well. Had done the Derby, Royal Ascot really well, and they said, "Look, we think it's time you did the Grand National now." And I remember having dinner with Lord Daresbury and all the other Aintree board, and I got this grilling from Lord Daresbury about, you do realise, my boy, what this event means to the country and all that. If actually, basically, don't cock it up. And anyway, we did a great job. Steve Doherty was directing, did a terrific job. And I was wandering around Waitrose the next morning with my wife, and my mobile goes, and it was Jonathan Martin. "Jeff, just want to say, thought the coverage was terrific yesterday. Can I make just one point?" And I thought, that's Jonathan, I said, "Of course you can." He said, "That camera you've got on Beecher's Brook," he said, "I'm not quite sure that works because the angle of," and he went into this whole sort of, he was probably right. And I said, "Look, I'll pass it on, Jonathan, thanks," But that's great, we never think you should never think in television that you've got it 100% right every time, because, you know.
Some people did get annoyed, but Jonathan passionately cared about it. And I think
He did. I mean, I you know, I've got a good relationship with Jonathan, even though we never worked together. He was the other side of the fence on the BBC, but I've got huge respect for him. I think he was a fantastic head of sport, and you know, he really fought for, you know, for sport in the BBC, and it's hard, and it's getting harder, despite the fact that sport rates, you know, big sport rates higher than anything else. I mean, we did the simulcast rugby last week, England-Ireland, and on Channel 4, they got their biggest audience for since 2017. Nearly 3.5 million people watching.
You may have answered my next question to some extent, because I wanted to talk about Channel 4. They're very keen on having their own style, look and feel, their own approach to it, which on the face of it, you say, well, rugby's rugby. Is it actually Channel 4? Now, I can see if it gets a big audience, there's a good reason for having it. But what do the commissioners at Channel 4 ask you to do to give it that particular flavour?
I think in the new regime at Channel 4 now, I think they just want really good, high quality sport. I think it comes down to the talent, really, the talent they want, or they feel is right for their channel, and that's really the big differentiator. Particularly if you've got a game which is being shown on 2 channels, one on Amazon. It's the same coverage. I mean, the main coverage was done by Amazon, which was our guys, but all the stuff around it was different on obviously on Amazon from Channel 4. But that's really down to the talent, and I think that is really the key differentiator is the different talent, and then having people that they feel fits the brand better than others.
One always thinks back to Janet Street Porter days, where the difference was made by waving the cameras around and putting them upside down. I don't think that would go down too well with the sports audience.
I remember once at ITV when I was executive producer, and Greg Dyke called me in, and he said one of the people on the ITV sports subgroup or whatever it was, I don't know, said they're a bit disappointed with the match coverage. So I said, in what sense? He said, well, look, he's a former LE director, and he doesn't think it's glitzy enough. So I said, well, what? So, you know, I said, you only get one chance at this, Greg. You know, you can't suddenly say, it was Brian Robson at the time I used, you know, playing for Manchester United. Brian Robson goes in at the far post. Oh, could you just do that again for me, love? I haven't got the star filter on it. You know, that's not how sport works. It's instant, and you need people that really get it. He wanted to direct our live games, this guy, this LE director. Can you imagine?
Just going to something else that you've done at Sunset and Vine, you've actually widened the coverage of sport. Take Henley, for example. I think when we spoke before, I mentioned that it was back in the 60s, I think, when John Vernon and probably Brian Venner did it for BBC Two, and it went out in the afternoon. Your coverage now, if I may say it, Henley, is outstanding. The use of the drone, and also the opportunity for, I know it's got lots of schools, and it's not the big, you know, international races are in the 8-laners or whatever, but Henley is very special, and it tells the story, but also it widens the viewing for someone who may have a son in a crew that's rowing in a race, and they can dial in on the web and watch the race. How does that business, and I think fencing you've done similar, on straight out to the web. How does that business model work? Because it's very quality coverage.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think the drone coverage of Henley, because it's just a straight course and only 2 boats at any one time, it can get quite repetitive. So I think that the drone coverage has given it a really different lease of life and a great feel, and you can actually put the race course into context of, you know, the surrounding area and stuff. But the business model is quite simple. Henley wanted TV coverage, and they pay us to do the production, and it can go out on you know, multiple platforms. The Henley channel, YouTube, BT Sport take it, and I think they're going to take it again next year, assuming we're through this COVID rubbish, and it happens, because it didn't happen last summer. But No, that's a straightforward deal where Henley pays us to produce it.
There's a lot of talk now about what is the future of broadcasters with sport, because, for example, clubs, leagues could own the rights and could go direct to their consumers, own that relationship. There'd probably still be a job for you, but the people at BT must be looking over their shoulder a bit.
Well, I think everyone's always looked over their shoulder with sports rights. I mean, who's going to be the new kid on the block? You know, who's going to come in with the next biggest check? And that's the way it works. And that's, if you like, I mean, it's the beauty of sport. I think the fact that it is the ultimate unscripted drama. You know, it delivers huge ratings, and that's why it costs so much money. And that's why, you know, people want it on their channel. You know, we're seeing Amazon have stepped into Premier League football. You know, they have 22 complete fixture lists per season. They're dipping their toe in. They're dipping their toe in on the rugby. And I would think Sky and BT will be thinking, I wonder where Amazon are going next. I mean, who else might come in? You know, Netflix might. Who knows? It's only a question, basically, of having the infrastructure right and writing a big check. And we all know where sports go if they get offered the biggest check. There's no loyalty there. They'll go where the most money is.
It's interesting, isn't it, that when we think back to those days when BBC and ITV were the key sports players, and they were attacked by the satellite pay subscription broadcasters, and now the subscription broadcasters are being attacked by the new people on the block. Yeah. You know, the Amazons, the Primes, you know, and Netflix and all sorts of people.
The streaming services, yeah.
It doesn't stand still. Can we go to technology a bit more? Particularly
hopefully not in too much detail.
No, because neither of us have got the pass on that. But there are some things that do affect the sort of production business and what have you. For example, a couple of years ago at IBC, I saw a rig that actually covered, I think it was a basketball game actually, but there's no reason why it couldn't have been a football game. It covered it without a director, without camera people. The algorithm was working out, I think there were RFID on the players and the ball, but it was working it all out. And actually the output was looking very respectable. And again, that's going to change the business model.
Yeah, I mean, they do the outside courts at Wimbledon like that, on a system like that. Basically, you know, remote coverage and no cameramen. Yeah, that will happen. I mean, you know, better brains than I will know how possible it is with 26, 27, 28 cameras and, you know, back cams and all that flying around. I can't see that happening on the major sports anytime soon, but certainly on the sports that have, you know, perhaps less money to spend, but and less going on. Like a tennis match is just two people on court. It's very, or four if it's doubles, obviously, but it's relatively straightforward to do. But I don't think that will happen on the big sports like rugby and football and cricket or athletics. It's just too complex.
But if you take a club game, whether it's in the EFL or in Championship Rugby, for example, there could become an economic model where the club can actually have one of these remote rigs and they can monetize the output of their game by people subscribing to it. It's maybe not at the top level, but at some of the next tier down, there could be opportunities.
There could be, yeah, absolutely. But you've then got to have a platform to air it on. You've got to attract people to that platform. They've got to be able to get to that platform, and you've got to get them to part with their money. And there's lots of different ways for people to spend their money now. And if they're subscribing to Sky or BT or both, it's costing people quite a lot of money. And I think that's one of the reasons why the pay-per-view experiment with the Premier League failed, because people weren't prepared to pay yet another 15 quid to watch even if it's to watch their team. You know, I'm a Tottenham man. I wouldn't pay 15 quid to watch Tottenham on top of my, you know, I don't want to watch it that enough. just to spend.
Well, us Southampton guys will, because we're not used to being so high in the league. But I mean, that's
nor are we. I've got a nosebleed so high.
Before I come on to Hawkeye, which I want to, Jack Barrett's called in saying, and this goes back to something you said at the beginning. In today's world, do you think it's important to go to uni in order to get into sports broadcasting journalism? Or are there still opportunities for people like yourself that got in without the university degree?
Yeah, I think there are, and I think there should always be opportunities, because I don't think everybody is suited to going to university. I mean, I wasn't stupid. I mean, I did O's and A levels, but I was never a great academic. I never really enjoyed that side of things. And I think there are. We certainly at Sunset and Vine, and because of my background and getting in, without going to university, we always give people a chance. And I don't care where they went. I don't care where they went to school, or what their qualifications are. In fact, one of the things Jimmy Hill said to me, he looked at my CV and he said, you obviously didn't spend that much time in the classroom. I said, no, to be honest, I was more interested in the in playing sport, Jimmy. I was just honest. But when we had the conversation about sport, you've got to really know it. You've got to love it. You've got to show that passion. If I interview young guys and girls now, I can tell within 30 seconds whether they've got something about them that they really get sport and they're really into it, and they understand TV, not understand TV, but they love watching TV, and who's your favorite commentator, and that, all that sort of thing. You just get a sense of who's going to be good and who isn't. Get it wrong sometimes.
Yeah, no, thanks. And Jack, I hope that gives you some idea of how you need to present yourself if you go to Sunset and Vine. Make Jeff see there's something in you that's keen and there's potential. I don't know the secret of that. You'll have to work that out. But I think there's a clue there that you don't have to go to university to get in. You've got to look keen and have shown some interest, I think. Don't just go say you want to do it. Show what you've done already to get the job. Just going back to Hawkeye, because Hawkeye was something you were very involved in the development of. And Hawkeye as a business now has developed and grown into other fields. Did it actually start as tennis, was it, where it started?
No, it started in cricket. We were approached, we were covering Channel 4's cricket, and we did the first season. I think we did the first two seasons, so 1999 and 2000. And we were contacted by a guy called Paul Hawkins, who was a young scientist who worked for Siemens. And he was quite brash, but in a very nice way. He said, I can improve your cricket coverage. So we said, well, come in and have a chat. And he outlined the principles of Hawkeye. And we immediately thought, well, you'd have to be stupid not to see it. But we immediately thought, if this can be made to work, it could be revolutionary. And we said, well, come back when you've got a prototype. And he said, well, the problem is I can't, because Siemens won't fund it. So we ended up funding it. We ultimately bought the IP off of Siemens and brought Paul into the business. And we spent a lot of money. We spent around about £1 million developing Hawkeye, just for cricket at that stage. And then we used it on I think it was the 2001 season. And it was absolutely groundbreaking. And
what was that early version doing? Was it ball tracking or? Yeah,
it was ball tracking. I mean, it was pretty similar to, well, it's the same. Well, other people might say it's not the same, but it's effectively, it's the same ball tracking technology that they were using. It's just become more sophisticated. But we only saw it really as a television tool, but realizing that the game would have to take it seriously, because if we could prove scientifically that, Mike Atherton was giving out LBW. In fact, I remember talking to Mike Atherton when he was still playing, and Paul and I showed him he was giving out LBW at Lord's, and Hawkeye showed that the ball was going over the top, and we showed it to him, and he was a bit sniffy, Mike, at that stage, and he said, well, it felt out to me. And and that's a cricketer's way of dealing with it. And we said, yeah, but it wasn't out. Now he's obviously an incredible guy, Mike Atherton. He's it's become part of the game, and the way it's used in cricket, the decision review system, is outstanding, I think. And Brooks, no argument. I think it's they found a way to use it really effectively, and they need to. And then they haven't done that with VAR yet.
Well, you're very good because you give me segues to what I was going to ask about next. Could you just give us a thought, being on the inside, could you give us a thought on the difference, because there are different approaches between the adjudication in rugby and football. So rugby's been at it a little longer with TMOs, which is actually quite a manual process, but it's quite good on television because you can see the protocol going through and you can see they're basically using angles. VAR is it seems far more sophisticated in what they're trying to do, although whether its efficacy is as good is questionable, certainly as it's breaking in. What's your thoughts about those two?
Well, I think rugby at the moment are using it more effectively because the referee on the pitch, he is absolutely the man in charge. And if you get people like Wayne Barnes or Nigel Owens, they will quite often watch a sort of bungled over try, and they'll just blow their whistle for a try without going to it, whereas a lot of the others will do that.
I mean, I'm seeing it in tennis as well now, where the umpire is actually looking at double hits and things like that, which is new. More and more, it's becoming automated.
You saw the ATP finals last weekend. They didn't have line judges. Yeah. Did you miss them? I watched quite a lot of that.
I don't miss them. I think it's a cleaner shot. But
so do I.
I noticed he was also going to look. There was one question about a double hit, and he was looking at a replay.
I think the decision has to be made ultimately by the man in the middle, because he's made the decision in the first place. And I mean, they're starting to do that more with VAR, with the pitch side monitor. In my view, it should absolutely be the judgment of the referee on the pitch, not a team of officials back at Stockley Park making that decision. And I think they're getting to that. Look, I think VAR is here to stay, and I think it will become more effective and efficient as time goes by. I don't think it's there yet, but it's great technology. They just have to work out a better way of using the technology, like they've done with cricket. Cricket is, to me, the gold standard. Tennis is much more simple because it's basically line calls.
Well, once again, Jeff, you've done a wonderful segue, because you've just led into a point that my former colleague Dave Pickthall has put here, talking about when all the rights go behind a pay barrier, and particularly cricket, for example. What's your feeling on the fact that means that kids don't really get exposure to high-class cricket and the impact that will have on them in wanting to even take the game up or know about it?
Well, I think we've seen since 2005, which was the last time Test cricket was shown on a terrestrial broadcaster with Channel 4, which we covered. There were, I think, in that final test at the Oval, I know it was a special summer, beating the Australians for the first time in 18 years or whatever it was. I think 8 million people were watching on that Monday at one point. The final day at the Oval when we won the Ashes. That's extraordinary. Those figures, and this is no criticism of Sky, but not everyone can afford to have subscription. Cricket has suffered in the intervening years because it wasn't available to as many eyeballs as possible. And that has impacted on the number of people playing the game. I mean, I played my club cricket at Finchley in the Middlesex League. They can barely get 2 teams out now. We were getting 3 or 4 teams out Saturdays and Sundays when I was playing. I think it's, all sport suffers if you can't get the eyeballs. And, it needs terrestrial television, I mean, a lot of people criticize the BBC, but they've only got a finite amount of money to spend. They can't go bidding for all these, very expensive rights. But whenever they show something simultaneously, they get fantastic ratings, Yeah.
When you look back, and I'm not blowing smoke on what is a very distinguished career in TV sport, is there one memory that stands out?
There's a hell of a lot, really. I mean, winning the BT contract, winning the ICC cricket contract to do their stuff all around the world.
That's all business, though. What about, the players tell you they're there to make moments? What are the...
The most memorable moment was when I had a phone call from Mark Sharman, who was then head of sport at Channel 4, on Christmas Eve 1998, no, the day before Christmas Eve, to tell us we'd won the contract to cover Channel 4's cricket coverage. And that changed Sunset and Vine forever, because we knew that we had a compelling vision for how cricket should be covered. I mean, Gary Francis, who was the main executive producer and the man who made it all work. But sort of he and I, mainly him, but a group of us came up with these ways of covering cricket, to make it more entertaining and informative for the viewer. But we wanted the chance to be able to do it. And Channel 4 were brave enough, despite a lot of pressure elsewhere, to give us that chance. And, it put Sunset and Vine on a completely different level. We won the BBC's horse racing contract about a year or two afterwards. And we won that because of what we'd done for Channel 4. And I know it's, and so our business really, blossomed hugely once we went on the air. So in terms of my career, that is the single biggest moment of, being impacted by a decision.
Jeff, thank you so much. And thank you so much for giving us an hour of your time. It's been wonderful. And
I enjoyed it, Tim. It's no problem.
I hope it hasn't been, well, I was going to say two old fogies. I'm the old fogey. I don't know how you look so young after being in it so long.
Well, we might be older, but fogies, I don't think we're ready to be put out to grass yet.
Your hair hasn't changed colour like mine, so you've done very well. Thank you again so much. And thank you everyone for joining us.